Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today, and welcome to this launch event of our new toolkit, Engaging Locally, that we've written in partnership with Faith Action. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Dom Llewellyn from yourneighbour.org, and we're a network of over 1,300 churches across the UK working together to care for our communities in crisis. This includes us running a helpline, connecting people who need help with people who local churches can help them, and specialist teams who can help them too, supporting church leaders through webinars and training, and equipping churches to work with local and national government at this time, and other initiatives too. One project we've been really working on in the past few weeks is around food poverty in children. We're working with churches to support primary schools in the most deprived areas of our country, and are partnering with TLG, Love Your Neighbour, the Message Trust and Salvation Army in a project called Lockdown Hunger. If you're interested in finding out more, please visit yourneighbour.org/lockdown hunger. And if you're a church leader and want to be involved, TLG have a small grant that can help you get started. We at yourneighbour.org, as well as Faith Action, are always struck by the amazing work that churches across the country are doing locally. And we're really keen to support you in this. And we're very committed to helping churches engage well with their local and national governments. Our aim with this toolkit is to equip you and give you the tools and resources to work with your local authorities. The principles are also applicable to other local partners and also to national government. And you're in for a real treat today. Our panel are exceptional. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll introduce them each before they share a few words. We're going to have about 30 minutes of a panel discussion before opening it up to Q&A. And if you want to ask a question, please can you private message me, Dom Llewellyn, or Dominic Llewellyn as it actually is, in the private chat. And we'll try and ask the panel as many questions as possible before we'll be finished by 12. So I think the toolkit right now is going to be, in case you haven't seen it, the toolkit's going to come up in the chat now for you to have a look at. But first up, we're going to have Ruth Kennedy speak to us. Ruth wrote the principles and is a local government expert, as well as being an active member of her local church. Ruth is a former senior civil servant from the Cabinet Office and also Number 10 and Department for Education. And for the last 10 years has run the Public Office, which is a small consultancy leading innovation and disruptive change across the country, mostly with local authorities. Ruth, it's great to have you here. Thanks so much for all you've been doing with the toolkit. I wonder if you'd be able to share a few words on the principles and also your thoughts on how churches and local authorities can work well together.
Sure. It's really good to be here this morning. Hi, everyone. I'm speaking to you from sunny Fife, which isn't where I normally am, but it's nice to be north of the border at the moment. I've spent a lot of time over the last 10 years, more than 10 years, working in partnership with local authorities. And one of the things that's really different about local government and other agencies at local level is the extent to which the people working in it deeply connect with the people that they serve in a way that's just not possible for people who work in central government. And certainly what I've seen since the COVID crisis started was a totally unsurprising, incredible passion for people at local government to do what they can to support local people, to support health, prevent death, support those going through a COVID crisis and so on. And I think it's really good to hold that that passion at the front of your mind when you're thinking about local government. I think people think of local authorities being kind of, I don't know, bureaucracies, the sort of faceless local government, but generally they're full of people, often local people, who really want to serve local communities as well as they can. And so there's a fantastic overlap, I think, in vision and passion for local people and local communities that many churches have as well. So what we thought it would be useful in order to help churches have the best possible impact in the way that they can serve alongside other partners locally. We thought it'd be good to talk to those who are doing it, and many churches have been doing incredible stuff, I mean for years, but particularly over the last sort of 16 weeks or so. But I had conversations with a whole range of people on the phone to ask what was going on, how was it happening, what were the enabling conditions that would most help churches partner brilliantly with local government. So I spoke to a number of people who are in churches, or are church leaders, or senior leadership across different parts of the UK church. I spoke to chief executives, to directors of adults and children's services, for people running COVID response teams inside local authorities. And it was from the listening to all of those people that it kind of became clear that there were a number of themes emerging. And what we've tried to do is to capture those themes in the toolkit that's published today. So very quickly, I will whiz you through what the key principles are that we think will really help make for fantastic partnering relationships at local level. So number one is to do your homework. There's something really critical about seeking to understand how the world looks from someone else's perspective. If you're standing in the shoes of someone in children's services, or someone running the COVID response team, or maybe your local authority chief exec, what does it look like? What do they see when they look out of the window and they're thinking about what the local challenges are, what the local needs are? And I think spending time to understand what others see in your locality, other charity partners, other churches, everybody will bring a slightly different set of perspectives. And the more that you can listen to other people's perspectives, the richer your understanding will be of what's going on and how you might be able to really make a fantastic difference. It's also about finding your way around. As I said, I think these systems can look quite opaque and difficult to understand. So asking who's who makes decisions, who is it who goes to listen to what communities are going through, find out who the key players are. They are sometimes people in positions on an organogram, but also as soon as you start talking to people, you'll realize there are named people. They'll say, oh, John, he's been around for years. He knows everything about that part of the community. There's intelligence like that that's really helpful to learn. Ask questions. There's lots of acronyms and shorthand that people working in local government and for local services like the NHS or the police use. Don't be afraid to say, I'm really sorry, what does that mean? Or, what do you mean when you say this or you say that? Ask those questions, because it also helps them to understand where you're coming from too. Number two, and in a way, I guess it's the most important one, and you'll know this already, build trusted relationships. That's an intentional piece of work, and it's something that often takes time. But when it becomes a friendship between named people, as opposed to someone from this church trying to contact someone from that department, I think that's when things really change. So get to know people by name. Ask them what's going on for them, find out what matters to them, be a trusted, be a friend to people over time, and offer invitations. Take people for coffee. Just build those relationships in the way that you would in any other part of your life, so that you really know named people. That makes an enormous difference, and it makes an enormous difference to local authorities too. Oh, Dominic from that church, he's just so helpful. Let's give him a ring. They need to know you as well as you needed to know them. The third principle is to open up a pastoral space. One of the things that I see a lot when I'm working with people at local government level is just how hard people work and make sacrifices in their own lives, which nobody notices and nobody asks about. Very few people are being looked after. So if you can be the person who says, how are you really doing? It must be really stressful. How's your family? That really makes a difference. And there probably isn't anyone else doing that. It's a fantastic role that the church can play. So the more you get to know someone, you can be praying for them. I think when you've already started praying for them, tell them that you're praying for them. And, you know, as you get to know people, you can say, I'd love to be praying for you. I'm so sorry you lost your granny. You know, we'll be lifting you up in prayer. Is there anything we can pray for? That is a really powerful role that the church can play, and something that's very, very different to what other agencies or charities might be doing. The principles link together, obviously. So be relational in the way that you open up that pastoral space. So be sensitive about very busy people's time. I would say don't communicate by email. Pick up the phone, send them a postcard. Do those things that show you really care. Fourth thing is to be really clear and realistic about what your church can offer. And again, you'll all know this already, but really talking amongst the body of the church to figure out what is it that we're really good at? What do we have confidence in? What have we done already, perhaps in a small way, that we think we could start to do more? I think one of the things that I heard very much from COVID response teams was they found that one of the very frustrating things about the voluntary sector activity in localities is that it changes. Somebody can be doing something for a while and then they're not doing it anymore. And an offer being sustainable is really, really important. So be really thoughtful about whether you really have got the resource and the energy and the volunteers and the expertise that you need to make an offer. And I would, suggest go with your sweet spot. Go with what you know you're really good at. And different churches have fantastically different strengths. And it's worth connecting with other churches in your locality and maybe sharing with each other what you're offering or thinking of offering, and seeing what that looks like when it's put together like a jigsaw. The fifth principle is to be confident. I think there was a period where there was nervousness about being a faith-based organisation and trying to connect with government. And it's hard to know how much it was real, how much it was perception. But I think sometimes that meant the church slightly lost its confidence to be operating in the kind of public sphere and to be partnering with agencies like local government. But I think we can be really confident about what we can do and what we can bring, and again, the way that we can learn from what other churches have done, and we can say, well, look, we've not done this before, but we know these people over there and they've done it and we think it could work here. To be really clear about the church's real strengths. And I think many people don't understand that the church isn't the building or the vicar or the pastor, that the church is the family, it's the body, and therefore many of our churches are really good at being really representative of the people in the local community. We are of the community ourselves. It's not a sort of parachuting in of people. So I think there's real confidence that we can offer around the church, its presence, its place, and the opportunity that it has. And then the final one is to seek always to be a blessing. And I said this before, but I think it's really worth knowing just how hard people are working at the moment. People are working ridiculous hours. They're working through the weekend. Many people haven't had any sort of break since March. And being a really practical blessing to people rather than being an agency that's asking for stuff all the time, again, is a really distinctive thing that the church can do. And whether that's baking cakes and taking them round, whether that's offering to bring round lunch to an office. So, you know, how many people have you got? We'll bring salads and sandwiches on a Friday. Whether it's just being really mindful about people's time. Seek always to be a blessing, and I think you can't go wrong. Is that enough, Dom?
That's fantastic, Ruth. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing, and we'll come back to you in a bit on thinking about what are the opportunities for the church moving forwards. But thank you for that. And next we have Daniel Singleton. Daniel has been the National Executive Director of Faith Action since 2007. And Faith Action have obviously partnered with us in this publication. And in this role, Daniel has become influential in a number of government departments, highlighting the significant part that faith-based organisations are playing in communities around the UK. Daniel's actually got to leave us slightly early because he's on the task force for opening up places of worship. So that's been taking up a lot of his time recently. But Daniel, thank you so much for giving up your time today. And we just wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on how churches and faith groups have been working with local authorities, and also what are the opportunities?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dominic, for having us here. And I want to take the opportunity. I don't know if we thank ourselves enough within the faith sector or within churches as well, just to say, I'm recognizing more and more what people are doing. They're going well and beyond what's expected of them, and I think we truly are being a great witness to the country at this point. So and yeah, that task force is an interesting thing, and please do get in contact if you're interested in places of worship, that kind of thing. It's certainly taken up a lot of time, but it's given us a great opportunity to connect throughout the country more and more and see what is happening. So one of the areas that we've been involved with for a number of years is that we help run the all-party parliamentary group on faith and society. And that was really a group of MPs that wanted to look at how they could support faith in the public square, how they could support churches and faith groups as they were seeking to get involved more and more in society. And some of the stuff that Ruth mentioned in terms of that whole squeamishness about working with faith, they wanted to overcome. So it mentions it in the report, in the toolkit, about the whole area of that work. So I won't go into that now, but the whole relationship, that's the thing that came across again and again with what Ruth said about forming a relationship. So I want to kind of just knock off a few things in relation to that. Can I just add to whatever Ruth said? Listen to it again. It was great stuff, and I wholly endorse it, and it's a great toolkit as well. What we've seen, particularly at this time, is that faith is often the first in and the last out, that people have been responding to what's been happening. They've been providing food. They have been supporting doctors. We've been cheering on the NHS and essential workers, and that's often been something that's happening. And one of the greatest pains for me and other parts of the voluntary sector is that people of faith, they get their heads down, they do it. We don't necessarily count it and to collect the data to show the impact. And I think that's one of the things I really want to encourage is that, you know, how many meals have you delivered? How many people have you helped? How many phone calls have you done? How many people have you reached out to? And that's, I've just come off a call with the Red Cross, and they're saying that's the real problem of being able to demonstrate what's happening and actually where the issues are, because we know that often faith groups and churches are placed in areas where there are not other voluntary sector organisations. There's not so much networks and that kind of thing. And I know that local authorities have spoken to us in the past about utilising the networks, the connections, the infrastructure or relational and social infrastructure that faith and Christians have, so as to reach those places that other people don't reach. And so I suppose that's another one of our key phrases, that faith reaches the parts that nothing else can. And I think that reach and that connection to those hard to reach communities, often we've found that statistically unimportant communities, little pockets of new arrivals in terms of people arriving in the country who are disconnected from the benefit system, disconnected from different helplines, are not spotted sometimes by local authorities, but are connected through to churches. So in that sense, there is a way of creating evidence and intelligence, I suppose, to connect with those harder to reach people. Too significant to ignore is another one of our little key catchphrases, that actually faith is it's there, it's big. I know there's a lot of discussion about the decrease of church attendance. I think that's been bucked in various parts of the country. We're seeing an increase of people committed and connected and making a difference, and certainly that's a key factor at this time. There's more people seeking faith and more people, and somewhat it's because of the practical and the good works that have been done, which are key as well. And actually we find often that if government, if local government, if central government, if trust funds give funding to faith organizations, often they go further and do more and make more impact with it. Partly that's because I believe that all of us share this duty to the widow and to the orphan. The widow in today's society are those without economic independence, and the orphan is those without a place of belonging. And in terms of what Ruth was saying about picking what your sweet spot is, I think most of us operate within those areas. We find a point of connection, we reach out to people. I suspect if we could gather the data, we would find that people who are connected in with churches, who are part of a church community or on the fringe of a church community, have been connected and reached out to and helped a lot more than those who are not at this time, particularly thinking about people who would naturally be more isolated. That actually we may go and deliver food, but we go and have a conversation, or we chat to people, and we actually know the people. My next door neighbor, she doesn't come to our church, but she taps into a lot of the social things. She's not been dropped. She's not been at this time just because she can't go out to the shop. She's been looked after. She's been connected to, and that's not just our family. She's had to put up with my kids around the house a lot more, making a lot more noise. So, as I'm sure we're all helping our neighbours suffer in that way. So those are key aspects of what we do. I want to build on some of the things that Ruth said about the intentional nature of things. I connected to Faith Action, came out of a local organisation called Lifeline, and as they started to feel they wanted to serve in the local community, they went to the committees, they went to the different open groups, they got connected, they did the hard graft work of finding out what are the needs, what are the issues, and actually what was it in that organisation or in that church that then could respond to it. And so those relationships are absolutely key. And we found, as we grew as an organisation, as Lifeline grew, that we were asked into different areas because we had a problem solving, a solution focused nature. And I think in this time, the people can be quite bleak, and sometimes in the rest of the voluntary sector, people can be bleak as well. But actually, if we come in with a sense that we want to bring up about positive change, that's key. The other factor I would say that it's important to consider, as well as doing a bit of an audit on the skills available within the organisation and what you can do, and there's some links to that in the toolkit. Also consider releasing champions. I think that many of us in our churches have people who, they may not be the worship leader, they may not be the preacher or the kids worker or those kind of things, but they've got something bubbling inside of them which actually needs to be outworked and aided to do some stuff in the community. So actually we're seeing a lot of that, and we've got people with a passion for the poor and a passion for the lonely and those kind of things, and it doesn't quite seem to fit within what we're doing within church. So what can we do outside? So being solution focused is really key, and we've seen a greater interest in these things. Many times I've sat with the Right Honourable Stephen Timms when he's been talking about what faith groups are doing, what churches are doing. He said, who'd have thought in the 2000s, after the 2008, 2009 economic crisis, that we would have hungry people on the streets of the UK? But that has been the case. And who has responded? Well, with partnership with Trestle and food banks and other organisations, it was the churches that stepped into the breach. And there is now a sense that we have won a right to sit at the table to say we've got something to offer, something to share. and and that's one of the reasons why there is this task force, and there is a continued trying to work out from government how to work with faith organisations. There are some great stats if you want to look at what faith groups have been doing even before the crisis. The Cinnamon Network has got the the Faith Action audits, which are great to have a look at, and you can get some stats there. But I would think that when we start to look at what's been done at this time, and the APPG is doing some research around that, I think with Good Faith Partnership as well, related to what's happening, how local authorities are working with churches, there we will see a great increase of the relationship and the serving that goes on. So I won't go on any longer because I don't want to send you all to sleep, but I'm available for some questions.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Daniel. And thanks for sharing some of your thoughts. I thought there were some amazing nuggets there. The church, the first in and the last out. We're not necessarily good at measuring what we're doing, though. I think that's a provocation to us all to kind of really think about the impact that we're having and the outcomes that we want to achieve. Faith reaches the part that nothing else can. And also, obviously, we're too significant to ignore, but release champions. So thank you for that. And thank you for all that you're doing and for your partnership. We really value you. I'm delighted to have with us Angie Campbell. Angie Campbell is the co-senior pastor at the C3 Church, Cambridge, who are one of the case studies in the toolkit. She's been in pastoral ministry in Cambridge for 26 years, and having previously worked, I think, as a maths teacher, the C3 Church, though, has doubled in size since moving into a purpose-built community and church centre, and she was instrumental in establishing Cambridge's Trussell Trust City Food Bank and championing the Faith Action audit that Daniel just mentioned in partnership with Cinnamon Network. They are partnering both with local councils and DEFRA through COVID and have done an amazing job. And Angie, it would be great to hear from you more about what you're doing across Cambridge and Cambridgeshire and some of the lessons that you've learned. So welcome. I think you're on mute.
There you go. Hello, I'm on now. Good to be with you all. Yeah, I'm here in Cambridge, and as we've said, I've been here for 26 years. I've seen many changes over those years, over that time. Cambridge has actually been voted as the most unequal city for 2 years on the run, which it seems incredible to believe because there is such affluence here in the city. You'd think that we'd be able to equal it out and not have any poverty. But actually, the reality is that the longer I've been here, the more that I've seen the increase of poverty. We at C3 have a strapline that we're here to do good. And that has been part of our fabric, part of our foundation here as a church. We started as a small community meeting in a school and built a purpose-built building for community and church use and opened it in 2015. And that was a 7 million building project. It took quite a bit of time. But before then, we were involved in the city. We were doing, we set up the food bank. We got involved in housing with Hope into Action. We got involved in protecting people in isolation for families and the elderly, got involved in CAP. Basically, anything that was going on that was a good model that we could see that was working other places. We, rather than starting something new ourselves, we looked out, saw what models were out there and got involved and adopted them. And that was a really great way for us to start and to partner with other organizations. When we built this building, we had the real intention of having it as a community centre. So we opened it up for food poverty, for having a distribution centre for the food bank, but also having an open lunch every Friday and feeding whoever needed to be fed. And part of that, we also did the Faith Action audit with Cinnamon. So that was incredibly helpful to build relationships with our council and county council. We as a church knew that we were focused into the community, but actually building those relationships then allowed us to build partnerships and for the councils to see that we were serious about it, that we really were here to do something good in the city and we were here for the long haul. We weren't going to be here and gone the next day, but actually what we were going to do was going to be for long distance. Singleton. So we found out that Cambridge was 8 million was actually the worth of the value of all the social action that was taking place here in the city, and that was in 2016. When we had the results event, when we launched the results of our Cinnamon Faith Action Audit, we actually invited all the councillors, all the head of council, head of county council, the mayor, the MP, anyone who would come basically, and launch the results. And Matt Bird actually came and did the keynotes for us at that meeting. And at the end of that meeting, the head of the county council came up to me and said, "It's fantastic what you're doing as a church here. We want to help you. Come and see me. How can we help?" So that began a relationship with a lady called Gillian Beasley, who's head of county council. And we were able to then bring in Cinnamon to a meeting with Gillian, which then resulted in some funding for Cinnamon to get from the county council, and that then was launching other projects that could be happened here in the city. So not only was our partnership with the county council growing, it was also growing with other organisations like Cinnamon and Faith Action. So that was a backdrop really for what already had been happening. We started to use our building. One of the things in the toolkit suggests using your building space, which we've definitely done. We've opened that up. We have English lessons for refugees within the city. We have different drop-ins where the council will run. So we're using our space in partnership together. We do something called a Friday Hub, where we have food available for whoever needs it, food distribution, CAP debt centre, free haircuts at times, as well as housing help and support within the building. So that was a backdrop before COVID hit. And then when COVID hit, we were really aware of the need for food and for food poverty for those who were also not only in poverty, but in isolation or were shielding and in self-isolating. So we got set about using our contacts, and we actually had a new head of community action, and she really got to grips with it all, getting food from supermarkets, getting food from restaurants that were closing down, but they still had their supplies coming, had farmers ringing up saying, "We have a lot of meat, would you like it?" We just said yes to everything, and then found a way to distribute it around the city, giving it to Salvation Army, giving it to the council work. We have a Food Poverty Alliance here, and we're part of that. And so we started actually making hampers up and to be distributed around the city. We had a lot of food and we had the need, but we didn't have so much what we're going to do with all this food and how we're going to get it out. And we then had volunteers coming to us. We had chefs in the city, still working with us now, volunteering because they were on furlough. So we have some of the top restaurants in the city, some of their workers coming in saying, "We'd like to cook and we'd like to make some meals." When you have 5 guys giving you 20 kilograms of mince because they're not open anymore, and sacks of potatoes, you suddenly think, we've got all this food, we need to actually cook it and portion it and then to give it out. So we started to do that. When I mentioned before about the results and Gillian Beasley coming up saying, "Can we help?" One of the things we mentioned to her is that there's a community centre called the Horizon Centre, which is right next to our church building. And we've all got our eyes on the Horizon Centre. We would like that building. We would like to do more community actions from that building. They are using it. And I did say to her, you know, we'd love to in some way have that building and work with you through that building. And she said, well, think about it, come to me with a proposal. Well, because of this food that was given to us, because of the need and the contacts in the city, we actually wrote to her and said, we need a kitchen. We need a catering kitchen to be able to cook. And on the ground, we'd asked locally, the managers there, they weren't that keen. But when we went to Gillian and we asked, you know, could we make this happen? She was very keen to make it happen. And I think that was a consequence of building a relationship. I think that's a really key thing, that the relationship was already there, and asking whether we could support in that way. Could we use one of their facilities? It became a yes. So we actually now have the key for the Horizon Centre, which was a great win in our minds, because it means that we can partner, we can work, we can feed more people. To date, we have fed 50,000, well, we have given out 50,000 meals. We will hit the target this week. So that's a lot of food that's given out through hampers and through individual meals that have been given through that hampers. We've also opened a food hub, which the local council was opening food hubs around the area, and weren't able to go to the local villages and asked whether we would set that up. So we actually set that up, and that's running twice a week. And again, that's free food. People can walk in, no conditions, no vouchers needed. They can just access that food. It's food from supermarkets. It's food from good quality food as well, because we've also been given DEFRA funding of 61k, which we're feeding 2,000 people, 2,000 meals a week that we're doing with DEFRA funding, feeding about 800 people. So that's been working globally. We're working with the government with DEFRA. We've also had the South Cambs Council asking us, will we cook and provide 2,000 meals for them a month so that they can distribute it. So we're working with them in that way, cooking for South Cambs. I'd like to say that the big thing is that trust is really important. And I believe that as a church, we've built trust over the years being here, that we do deliver on what we say that we're going to deliver on. We are clear on what we can do and what we can't do. The toolkit is fantastic. I wish I had that a lot earlier, because there's just like so many practical principles in there of the way forward. We've learnt by our mistakes, and we've just tried things, and we've just built relationship and seen what's happened. But I think there's some really key practical things on that toolkit that could really help. I think be human together. You know, it is people that you're working with, and people that have got a heart for your community as much as often as the church has as well. I think it is amazing, the community spirit that is built when you build together, and you're not looking for who's going to get the credit, but you work together on it. And I would say be human together, care for one another, be resilient in your relationships with each other, forgive one another, and know when to push forward and when to back off a little bit, when you want other people to actually work into an area. Don't fight for a patch, but work together in it. Trust is our capital that we work with. I believe we have got a proven track record. We will deliver. We've got a heart for the city. We are value for money, and we work together and share resources. Our final thing that we got yesterday is the keys for a warehouse that we've been given from a local business guy who hadn't had the warehouse being used for the last 2 years, and we've got it for 6 months just to pay utilities, and we don't have to pay anything else. So we will be in discussion soon to see whether we'll actually work with the council, whether there's something that we can do in partnership there as well. So that's me.
Fantastic, Angie. Thank you so much. So good to hear all of what C3 are doing and the C3 Church, and it's great to be partnering with you, your neighbour.org. Really grateful for all your support. I love what you said about building trust. I love what you said about being human. Thank you for mentioning forgiveness, and also what you said about not fighting for a patch but partnering, I think was really powerful. So thank you for that. We're going to move now into a Q&A for the final 25 minutes or so, 22 minutes. So look, please do send me any questions that you may have, and looking forward to the discussion. So to kick off, Ruth, Steve has said one of the positives from the pandemic is that our URC church-related community workers have found themselves much more involved in partnership work with local authorities, particularly with the emergency response teams. What opportunities can you see for these partnership initiatives post-pandemic? And also, Daniel, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's huge opportunity, because I think one of the things that has been a real urgent issue and highlighted by COVID, but which is an endemic issue that people have been worried about for a long time, is that of social isolation and loneliness. And that's, you know, it's risen up the list of things that people are concerned about at the moment because of COVID and you know, whether people are getting food and medication and so on that they need when they're isolating. But there has for a long time been a deep concern about loneliness and the way that excuse me, impacts on outcomes across a whole range of different policy areas, you know, people's physical health, people's mental health. There is so much that relates to, you know, our need to be in community and to be known and to be loved. So one of the things I certainly think there's opportunity to really ramp that up. So I've been in lots of conversations at local level over the last 8 years where people have been saying, oh, we must do something about social isolation and loneliness. It's a real problem, isn't it? But it's never really, in many places, been high enough up the agenda for really strategic, sustained action to happen. I wonder whether there's a fantastic opportunity to see continued into I mean, I don't know if we're going to get to normal again, but to continue the work that people have been doing to know their neighbours, to offer practical support and to be befriending people, for that to be something that continues. And I think there's real opportunity around that and how that relates to how we care for elderly people, how we care for people with disabilities in community, people with perhaps long-term mental health conditions, and so on and so forth. And, you know, picking up what Angie was saying, you know, it's so much of that is about relationships, and that's kind of the heart of who we are as people of faith. So, you know, that's certainly a big area, I think, is a real opportunity.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ruth. And Daniel, what are your thoughts on that?
I've just popped a couple of things in the chat. There is a real, I kind of want to take a step back in terms of trying to capture what has happened, which has been positive already. And one of my concerns is that we can respond well in a crisis, and then all those great connections can disappear. And we've been in conversations with the NHS and with others trying to see, is there some way we could map these connections between different groups? Some of you would have come across the term a social prescription, which is essentially where a GP or some other professional gives a prescription not for medicine, but for a lunch club or different things like that. And part of the things, we need to get those working relationships going really well. The difficulty is knowing the people and building a relationship with everyone. And so that's an area, it was an area we were to be focused on this time in terms of faith action, when we're still looking at that. I think a lot of the stuff that Ruth said and what Angie said about making those relationships are really key, and trying to maintain that. If you're related with one person in an area, you'll probably find, even if they move on, that you can actually get a connection and that kind of stuff. In terms of loneliness, it's a real opportunity. I think one of the things we have to be is a little bit wiser. To give a personal example, my wife had a sudden back problem and ended up in hospital. Not a great thing to happen at this time. And the community around us were absolutely superb in serving us physically. But what they didn't know was that actually we'd been giving out a lot of time to different people and that kind of stuff. But there was no kind of how you doing in yourself, and that personal connection. It comes right back to what Ruth was saying about that pastoral kind of piece. And I think that we have to recognise that one of the things we've heard from the NHS is, with their NHS volunteer responders, that collecting the shopping list and delivering the food takes longer than buying the food. Because when you're delivering that food, when you're taking that shopping list, that is, you're probably the only person that person has seen. And when you're delivering it, and I think part of the thing is just to accept that and realize that we are doing a ministry around loneliness and connecting. No one's ever going to sign up and say, I'm lonely, can you give me a call? Absolutely. But they will say, actually, I could do with a pint of milk. And actually realizing, so we've just got to make sure we've put on the half an hour either side of it to do those other bits. And I think we're good at that in our communities. think that's
can I just butt in, Daniel?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to emphasise the point, I should have said it earlier. That was a message that I heard from all the local authority people that had that they were told you must reach people who will be lonely. And even when they had really skilled people on the telephone asking about needs, people did not want to say that they were lonely. Yeah. Absolutely right.
Yeah. And partly there's a minister for loneliness. We've had a few over the past little while. But the first, which was Tracy Crouch, said that she felt that loneliness was a new taboo after mental health. That actually people will be more happy to admit to having issues around mental health than loneliness. So actually, I think I don't think people need to name it. I think we just need to, sometimes I think we just need to be proactive in that whole area. And I think that's really key. And I think all of us, we know we can be lonely in a crowd and all that kind of different thing, and actually reaching beyond the practical and that heartfelt eye to eye, how are you doing, what's going on for you kind of thing, I think is important. I think people were surprised when we actually asked those questions. You look at your MP and say to them, how are you doing? I think you'll get some interesting responses. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to both of you. Yeah, I think loneliness is a real issue, and something we've really reflected on through our helpline is that when people have been ringing us, they often obviously don't talk about their loneliness, but that's at the root of it. They talk about something else, but you realize, gosh, that they're really lonely. And I was really struck reading the other day that a survey was saying that 9 million people across the UK, which is more than the population of London, say that they are always or often lonely. And I think there's a real opportunity for us as the church to be people's neighbours, to love our neighbours, and to recognise that loneliness is a real pandemic in our country. So thank you so much for sharing. And also I see some great resources both from the National Association of Local Councils and also Faith Action. So really appreciate those in the chat. Daniel, question for you. So as Mina has talked about the fact that that obviously sometimes we can, as the church, be seen as and potentially today seen as fairly white, and just wondering how we can be more inclusive to people of colour and just making sure that actually we can be more representative. And I know you've done a lot of work with BAME churches, and would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's always difficult as a white guy starting to answer that question, but I think, I keep coming back again and again to relationship, and I think I was a history teacher, and when you study history you start to look at why people do things and why things happen in different ways. And I think part of the thing of this particular moment we're in is recognizing what are the things that we keep doing that get the same results. So are we doing things in a particular way which mean people can and can't access things? Are we doing things? I work across faith. We know that it's really no good doing stuff on a Friday afternoon. That knocks out a whole bunch of other faith organizations. So we just don't do it. We do some single gender things. So we can do women's only groups and different things like that. So I think thinking actively about it and asking the question, and it would be good. I'd love to catch up with Asmina a bit on the side to hear what her thoughts would be on those kind of things as well. But I think that it's intentional. I think not just kind of thinking everything's fine. I think it is. I'm just looking at a sea of faces here, and actually we've done a number of calls, as I'm sure Dominic you have, and it happens to be this is one way. I had another call. I had the same thing put to me and said, oh, there's only white faces here. And actually the last call was only non-white faces. So there can be a little bit of a thing there. But I think being active, wanting to hear what's happening, and I'm very happy to connect more on that and hear more about that, as I'm sure you are, Dominic, on that side.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Real wisdom there. And I totally agree with everything you've said. But I think there is a real emphasis for us as the church to think about how we can, particularly at this time, I think, really understand and seek to listen to obviously the pain that a lot of people have felt post George Floyd, and engage with it, and realize that I know for me in my own life, I've had to think, okay, where have I had microaggressions, and how can I walk through those, and how can I think differently in the future? So thank you so much for that. Angie, I've got a question for you, and the question is, how do we overcome potential concerns, it's from Tim, that we're using time of need to convert people, which could make councils nervous about partnering? So something about how do we address the concerns of councils around converting people as opposed to partnering with them and being a blessing?
I think we're saying the same thing, isn't it? Relationship, when you build trust and when they see that you are prepared to help without any strings attached, that they see that, yeah, you are willing to see people as individuals and not trying to benefit from them in any way as a church and a community. So I think the amount of people that we serve within the community without having to expect them to do anything back to us, hopefully would show and demonstrate that we're doing it with a free hand and with a generosity, without an expectation back for them to change faith or come into the building or come to a service. But what we don't shy away from the fact, though, that we are a faith community, and we say that our faith is our motivation for what we do. And we have in the building, we have what we call community pastors, and so they are available. So if people do want prayer, or we have a little prayer box, and we have a place that can write a prayer, people know that they can receive prayer if they want to, or they can come to a service if they want to, but there's no pressure to do that. Again, if once over time you get to know and get to realize that these people do genuinely want to bless the city, without having to have their arm at the back in any way concerning faith. We have had the questions, around funding. We got some laptops that we got for when we started our job club, CAP Job Club. Will we be showing the Alpha course videos on those laptops? And we assured them that we wouldn't show the Alpha course videos on those laptops, and that they will be dedicated for CAP, for the job club. And we had to send all the materials in. It was all read through to make sure that they were happy with what we were giving out. But they seem, when we say that our motivation, our faith is what drives us, seems to be an answer that they feel quite comfortable with.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Ruth or Daniel, have you got anything to add to that you want to add?
Just wanted to add one thing. Obviously, we have incredibly diverse communities across the UK. And one of the things that I was told by one of the senior church people that I spoke to was particularly around in places where there's a strong Muslim community, that actually it's really helpful to be very explicit about faith, that talking about prayer, talking about the disciplines of faith like fasting and so on, has been really helpful in connecting with Muslim partners in particular cities, for example, in the UK. So I think it sort of slightly links with the be confident thing. I mean, Angie's said everything that needs to be said, that once people know you and trust you, this actually tends not to be an issue. Being really upfront, it's completely reasonable. I think the request about the Alpha videos and the laptops, that's fine. But I think, and CAP as an organisation has shown lots of churches really clearly, how do you provide a service around job clubs or debt or whatever, and offer what you've got as Christians, but not require people to want that or to accept it, and just to be really clear that those two things don't have to run together.
Really great advice. Thanks so much, Ruth. Daniel?
Yeah, just a quick thing. I think the laptops is a great example, and I think we can kind of create lines of those kind of things. I would just like to throw back one thing, though. There is a myth of neutrality, as if that there is some space where people are not pushing over an agenda or a way of thinking. I've certainly known with our work over the past 10 years, the Department of Health, there are different themes and different concepts from different people which are pushed over at all times. So we have to be a little bit careful. I think it's, you know, like anyone, if I go to buy a meal, I don't want someone to be preaching at me at that point, Christian, Muslim, or otherwise. But I do think let's be a bit careful not to be overly. I think sometimes as Christians we're overly into fair play, and actually there's no such thing as neutrality. Secularism is not neutral either. It's an agenda in itself. So I say that I'm very uncombative in person, but I just want to put that thought in the back of your minds as well.
Thanks, Daniel. I think absolutely agree with everything that's been said. Everyone has a worldview, and we all kind of bring our own worldviews into what we do. One final question for you, Daniel, before I know you've got to run, but it's from Lynn. And Lynn says this. She says that she's a community engagement leader at her local church, and she's obviously, they've done a lot of consultation recently with police and local authorities, and it all points to needing more youth provision. And she's asking just very practically, have you got any advice really about funding, and also where she could get funding? I'm happy to answer this after you, and any areas that could be practical tips for her in that. You're on mute, I think. Sorry.
There you go. Sorry. Lynn, that was a wonderful setup for me to plug our funding e-news, which comes out on a weekly basis. So please sign up to that. It's at faithaction.net. In terms of the specific, at this moment in time, the specific funding coming out, the short-term funding, I don't think I've seen things related to youth, particularly from government, but there's been some things coming around. We are seeking to get those things out, and I have to confess I'm not as up to speed as I'd like to be. There is a real issue around youth work, and I know there's an issue that young people are getting a bit bored of this kind of format of Zooming and those kind of things. So, but I think that funding is trailing a bit behind a little bit, and I think potentially partly because people don't know what are the solutions to fund at this point in time. But if you drop us a line and get connected, we'll see part of our role with MHCLG is to talk about funding and resourcing and those things as well. So we can certainly ask some questions and find out. It'd be good to understand your situation, and I think Dom will have more useful things to say anyway.
Daniel, thank you so much. And I'm aware you've got to run. Just a couple of things from me in terms of funding sources. So if you're looking at particularly young people on the edge or risk of major youth violence, have a look at the Youth Endowment Fund and the work that they're doing. There's also going to be money coming from the Youth Futures Foundation. But also I think for us, a couple of points. One is, and yeah, do drop us a line at welcome@yourneighbour.org, and we'd be really, the email will come up, be really happy to help. But I think thinking about 3 points. One is, what is the impact that you're having? And being really clear about that, because that will help you with funding opportunities. The best way to get the next round of funding is to say what you've done with previous funding. So being really clear on the outcomes that you're achieving and how you're working with everyone. The second I'd say is don't reinvent the wheel. So I'd say the reality is that, and we've mentioned a few of them today, so there are great organizations like TLG, who'd be amazing around youth work, or Home for Good and Safe Families, who are brilliant around vulnerable children, or CAP, who are amazing around death and employment. These organizations work through local churches. And if you're thinking, how can I really learn about what best practice is, how we can work really well with our young people, get in touch with these organizations, have a look at what they're doing. Because I think there's a real opportunity to really kind of marry the reach and what local churches are doing and the reach they have into communities with the expertise of church-based social action projects. And I think for us moving forwards as churches, there's a real opportunity to do that and to do that well. So thanks so much for that question. One final question, which was from Justin. He says that, and I'm going to ask this to Ruth, and he says, local government often has multi-tiers. So he's talking about obviously parish and town councils, district and borough councils, county councils. Obviously, I would add to that, obviously, unitary and authorities, etc., as well sometimes, and combined authorities. Have you got any thoughts about how to navigate those, Ruth, or to best work with each level? Obviously, it depends on where they are in the country, but yeah.
Such a good question, because it can be very confusing. I think it relates to the first principle about doing your homework. So there are quite clear differentiations in what the different tiers of local government are responsible for, and that's how you can work out who's making the decisions on different things. So, you know, for example, in a place where you have a county council, but you will also have district and borough councils, children's services will be a county-wide responsibility. Usually things like housing are held at the lower tier district and borough level. For example, you should be able online to be able to go onto a council's website and see really clearly what they are responsible for. And I think, you know, so if you're thinking what you're offering might be really interesting to talk with people who are responsible for, let's say, adult services, so caring for vulnerable adults and the elderly, you know, make sure you're talking to the right tier of government in terms of decision making and government funding. Of course, you know, for example, your parish council, because it's very local and knows local people, will have a key interest in the health and well-being of elderly or vulnerable adults in a local community. So I think it's about, first of all, each council website will say what it is responsible for. So start there, because that tells you at least where money flows and where main decisions are taken. But where local government works really well, it works across those tiers. So, you know, a good county council is trying to work in partnership with the districts and boroughs, for example, and in partnership with other agencies. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Thanks so much, Ruth. It can be a complex system to navigate, but as Ruth says, do have a look at what your local areas are delivering and think about how you can work. But doing your homework is really crucial. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank the panel. Daniel has left, but thanks to him, and Angie and Ruth especially for the work she's put into writing the principles. But what a rich conversation. Thank you everyone for joining. Next week, we're partnering with World Vision and exploring how the church can support mental health and well-being. And that includes some leaders' lunches for with church leaders or anyone who's interested, with Mark Meluish and Patrick Regan, and an amazing panel discussion with experts around the world from World Vision on mental health and disaster response. We'd love for you to come and join us. But to end, Angie, I was wondering if we'd be up for quickly praying for us.
Sure. Yeah. Lord, I thank you for this opportunity to think and to learn from one another. Thank you for this toolkit, Lord, that gives excellent advice, Lord. I pray, Father, for everyone that receives this, that has this in their hand, that they'll feel the confidence that they can go forward, Lord, with a heart of compassion for the people around us, Lord. We know that your heart is to serve our country, to serve our parishes, our people, our communities. And Lord, I pray that this toolkit will be used by you, Lord, by your Holy Spirit, for relationships to be built, to be human together, to forgive one another, but also to see your kingdom established stronger here on the earth. We pray in your name that you'll be glorified through it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Angie, and thanks everyone. And for those of you who haven't yet seen the toolkit is available online at yourneighbour.org/engaging-locally, and you can download it as a PDF. It's a microsite there. Really grateful to you, and thanks so much for coming, and look forward to seeing you soon. Take care, everyone.